Hi, welcome everybody. Good evening. I'm Catherine O'Lean, Programs Manager at the American Library in Paris, and you are here for another edition of our virtual Evenings with an Author program. For those of you who are just discovering the American Library, we are the largest English language lending library on the European continent, something we're very, very proud of. But more than that, we're also a vibrant cultural center and event space. So for the time being, we're obviously meeting on Zoom so that we can all stay safe, but we actually do remain open to the public as well. So if you're local, if you're in Paris, you can feel free to stop by and check out books. And if you're not local, but are still maybe interested in being a member, you can do that too. We have a wide variety of digital resources available to you that you may well be interested in. We're also an independent nonprofit, so we don't receive support from either the French or American governments, but instead we rely on the generosity of our members and especially our donors. So I wanted to thank those of you warmly who are in the audience tonight who may be donors for the American Library and all of our supporters. You can learn more about us on our homepage. That's probably where you found out about tonight's event and were able to register. We're also on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, so basically any of the socials. And we also have our own YouTube channel. So if you're interested in seeing past programs, you can go ahead and check them out there. Great, so I am delighted to be joined tonight by Susan Herrmann Loomis. She is a France-based award-winning author with 14 books to her credit, a professionally trained chef, and a cooking school proprietor. Included among her titles are The Great American Seafood Cookbook, Farmhouse Cookbook, Clam Bakes and Fish Fries, French Farmhouse Cookbook, Italian Farmhouse Cookbook, and On Rue Tatin, a narrative about her life in France, with recipes which won the IACP Best Literary Food Book for 2002. Tarte Tatin, the sequel, Cooking at Home on Rue Tatin, Nuts in the Kitchen, and there's so many here. I'm going to read them all. In a French Kitchen, and of course, French Grill. She presented that book also in our Evenings with an Author program in 2019. So some of you may be familiar with her work from that. Susan has contributed to many newspapers and magazines, including the New York Times, LA Times, Boston Globe, Cooking Light, and Culture. She has participated in many television and radio shows, including Good Morning America, Home Matters, Epicurious Discovery, and others. She is currently developing a virtual cooking and cultural platform, which I think has just launched, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Susan to tell us more about that, as well as speak about her brand new book, Plat du Jour. Thank you for being here, Susan.
Well, thank you for such a nice, warm welcome, and thank you all for not falling asleep while she was reading the titles of my books. I'm delighted to be here. I am actually brazenly promoting this book, which is hot off the press. And I'm going to talk to you about Plat du Jour. But first, I just want to mention a little bit about this new cooking platform that I've launched, and it has launched. It's called dancingtomatoes.com. So if you're interested, it's a cooking culture and sort of a travel website, which was launched during COVID because through luck and chance, and you'll learn all about that, I met a videographer and we decided we wanted to bring travel to you and cooking to you. So I hope you'll visit and I hope you'll sign up, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun for me. And, you know, in Paris, we're still not really confined, but sort of half confined, so that we all scurry home to be inside at 6 p.m. because we have a curfew. And the threat of a new confinement is hanging over our heads at any moment. So we're just hoping that that doesn't happen, because it's wonderful to just be able to go outside during the day and do whatever we need to do, and then get back in time to have dinner and aperitif at home. Aperitif, for those of you who are on this side of the water. I just want to shout out my older brother and his wife, who are here from Spokane or Idaho or somewhere on the West. So welcome, and welcome to all of you. Plat du Jour is a book that is very close to my heart, which I guess I could say about most of my books, because I spend a lot of time working on them. And Plat du Jour, kind of what got me going on it was really my love affair with the soil and the history of French cuisine. So what got me to France and what kept me here is the French link with the soil. And what that translates into is French cuisine. And it's so related to what the farmers here are growing, which is indicative of the health of the soil. So I moved to France first in the early 80s I was 4 years old when I moved to France to study cooking. And I did not expect to spend my life here, but I fell in love with the simplicity of life in France. And what I mean by that is there were systems here that I could easily understand, which probably says a lot about me, but I could really understand going to the market, buying seasonal food, putting my money in the hands of the person who grew that food, and then taking that food home and cooking it and finding so much flavor that everything, I just felt like there were just wow moments all the time. So it just kept getting better and better. And I ended up moving back to the US after getting my culinary training and working on the Food Lover's Guide to Paris, which I think many of you know. I worked on that book, and then I moved back to the US. And all I could think about when I was in the US starting my career as a journalist and an author was getting back to that simple system and the flavor that I found in France. So it took me a while, but I got a contract to write the French Farmhouse Cookbook, which took me out into the farms of every region in France. And that's where I really fell in love. Because every time I'd go to a farm, I would choose the farm by what people were producing. But inevitably, we would be talking about food. And then I would often be invited for lunch or for dinner. And there I would sit down to the equivalent of the Plat du Jour. And Plat du Jour translates as dish of the day. And it is completely oriented toward the seasons. It's often oriented towards what's the least expensive at the market. So I would be out on the farm eating the Plat du Jour of whatever the farm cook, who was always a woman, was preparing. And I just fell in love with all that food, which was homey and rich and flavorful. And every single dish had a story. And it might have been, you know, the grandmother who made this, or the grandfather who chose the leeks, or some ancient story about the role of a certain herb in French cuisine. And I was just riveted. So I wrote the French Farmhouse Cookbook, and then I went on to do lots of other books. And then about 3 years ago, I moved part-time to Paris. And so I would spend time, you know, walking the streets of Paris. That's what we do here. And the Plat du Jour at all the restaurants, from 3-star restaurants to the local cafe, there's always a menu, and it always includes Plat du Jour, which changes every day. And that is because the chef is going to the market and saying, okay, what can I make today that's going to offer my clients the most flavor? And depending on the restaurant, what can I make today where I can, you know, make the best profit? Which means what's least expensive at the market, which means what's the most in season. Because what you learn when you focus on the seasons is that seasonal ingredients are abundant. What's abundant is less expensive than what's rare. So as I was, you know, sort of thinking about my next idea, I also was teaching a college course in the history of French gastronomy. So as I'm doing research on the history of French gastronomy, I'm going, you know, I'm thinking about this Plat du Jour idea, about this seasonality, and how the French, why is French cuisine so amazing? You know, I mean, people say it's heavy, it's complicated, it's this, it's that. It can be all those things. But the true essence of French cuisine is none of those things. It's absolutely about comfort, about flavor, about economy on every level. And then finally, the magic word, it's about pleasure. So pleasure starts going to the market and you're having your conversations and you're finding the most gorgeous cabbage or the most beautiful head of broccoli or, the mackerel that just jumped out of the water. And so then you take it home and the pleasure is involved in cooking it. And then for a restaurant offering a plat du jour, the pleasure is involved in seeing the client show up. Same client who comes every day and getting all excited that you decided to make, a filet of cod that you set on a bed of leeks. That's a winter dish. Or a roast leg of lamb that you pierce with little rosemary and then roast it on a bed of rosemary. Or a couscous, a simple couscous, which is a lamb soup with seasonal vegetables. So I got to thinking about this plat du jour and realizing that it's an ancient construct. So it goes back in, I'm in love with a personage from history whose name is Charlemagne. He's like really my person. But even before he was galloping through Europe and making sure that people grew all these herbs, and he had all these rules for life that had to do with agriculture. Even before him, the Gauls in what would become France were making plat du jour because they would go hunting. They would shoot a pig, usually a wild pig. They might roast its haunch or turn its meat into a sausage, and then they'd roast that. And every day they would be making these wonderful things, which to them was survival, but to us has translated into a dish from plat du jour that's braised lentils with garlic sausage and bacon. You can almost follow that dish right back to the Gauls. So plat du jour has a huge and very solid place in the history of French gastronomy, and it is absolutely related to agriculture. So to get back to Charlemagne, he in his kingdom, he was king of Europe. I mean, that was his big deal, and he Christianized Europe. That's a side story, but mostly he had these rules for agriculture. So he insisted that every farm in his domain he had a list of plants that they had to grow, and you should go find it online. It's called the Capitulari de Villis. And you will think that it's the most contemporary list of herbs and lettuces and greenery that you can imagine. We're all, it's everything that's trendy today. Charlemagne was demanding that his farmers grow, from arugula to sorrel to all manner of herbs. He also insisted that every farmer have a certain number of ducks and geese, that they have a small pond where they raised fish. So he was getting everybody, he was really instilling in growers not only sustainability, which is a buzzword today, but huge variety. And that all has gone into the history of French gastronomy, which all goes into the wealth and incredible deliciousness of the plat du jour. So the plat du jour really, though, with that title, is served in a restaurant. So the restaurant has an interesting history in France, and the first restaurant was opened in the 18th century, and we think, but there is controversy, we think it was a Monsieur Boulanger who opened what he called restaurant. So the word restaurant comes from the word restaurer, which means to restore, to give health. So he opened, and the restaurant was called a restaurant, but it was also called a bouillon. And he was only authorized to serve bouillon, which is, what bouillon is. We buy it in a cube, but in France it's chicken stock or beef stock or veal stock. So that was really the only thing that he was authorized to serve. And oddly enough, way back in the 18th century, it was mostly women who went to have bouillon, because they were the fair sex who often would faint because you know how they dressed. I mean, they could barely breathe. So they'd be out and they'd feel faint. And so they'd go and have some bouillon. Well, one day, Monsieur Boulanger decided he would stick his neck out. And the thing is, the reason he was only authorized to serve bouillon was because he could not compete. He was not allowed to compete with the charcutier of the time. And the charcutier of the time were those who prepared dishes that people would already, you know, they would come by and take home with them, or they might sit at the table and eat them there. But charcutier and restaurant was totally different. So he did stick his neck out one day and he decided to serve lamb's foot in white sauce. That was the first dish ever served at a restaurant in France. The first plat du jour. And I'm sorry to say I did not recreate that for this book. Because honestly, it doesn't sound appealing at all. I mean, number one, most people can't find a lamb's foot. Number two, a white sauce is basically bechamel with cream. So anyway, the annals of history tell us that was a first dish, so it was something people wanted to eat then. But I decided to put tastier things in the book that's called Plat du Jour. But after Monsieur Boulanger dared to do that, he was fined. He paid the fine and he did it again. And that's very French. In fact, that kind of relates to a contemporary story in that there are, you know, none of the restaurants in Paris or in France are open. Not one restaurant, not one cafe, not one bistro. They are closed tight, sort of, because there are clandestine restaurants open all over the place. And I'm not going to tell you where I live, but downstairs from me is a clandestine restaurant, and he's open for lunch and dinner every day. And everybody kind of knows without knowing. And so far, he seems to be safe. But the story is that if he's caught, he'll pay the fine and go back to doing what he's doing. So you see, there's a long tradition of that in France. So I'm just hoping he'll never get caught. And I haven't been. It's a wonderful restaurant. But he just told me, I run into him all the time. And he just said, look, my clients are begging me. They're begging me to open. So he's open. And you can today go buy a plat du jour from a restaurant. We have a system called click and collect. So you go online, you order your meal, and then you go to the establishment and collect it. And that's big business here right now. But what I think is even more fun is to get this book and make your own plat du jour. And I divided plat du jour. The thing is, plat du jour is part of what's called a formule. So when you go to a restaurant, let's say you sit down and there are all the dishes that the restaurant has on the menu every day. Then there's the plat du jour, which is part of a formule, which includes either dessert or a first course. It doesn't usually include a first course, a plat du jour, and a dessert. So you have to make a tough decision. But it almost always includes a glass of wine, which is why this is my prop. That's why I have this glass of wine. And it often will include an espresso afterwards. So I included in this book appetizers because often, again, when you sit down, even at a cafe, you will immediately be brought something. And that little something is called an amuse-bouche, which means, or an amuse-gueule in popular language. Amuse-bouche means to amuse your mouth. It's basically to keep you kind of distracted until the waiter or the waitress can come take your order. So it might be peanuts, it might be potato chips, or it might be some wonderful thing like one of the recipes in the book is sauteed shiitake mushrooms with a little bit of extra virgin olive oil on them. Or it might be radishes with fleur de sel and butter and baguette. That's a spring amuse-bouche. So you're sitting there enjoying that, and they definitely will pour your wine for you first. Then, if you've chosen as part of the formule, the first course, well, there you might get a curly endive salad with goat cheese that's set on a piece of garlic rubbed toast, put in the oven, and then it comes out and sits on top of the salad, and the salad is peppered with little pieces of crispy bacon. It's called frisé au lardon et fromage de chèvre. And most of you have probably had that, because when you see that on our menu, you have to order it. It's incredible. So another first course might be a squash soup. And in the book, I have a squash soup. It's very simple. You take a squash, you cook it with star anise, which is a spice that somehow fell off the spice trade truck when it was, or the spice trade carriage, when it was bumping through France 300, 400, 600 years ago, landed in Southwest France and is a very big part of the cuisine down there, and only down there. But it happens to be delicious with squash soup. So the recipe in this book is from the Southwest of France. But you might easily find it on a menu in Paris, because Paris really represents all the regional cuisines of France. And every region in France has its own singular cuisine, which is completely related to terroir. Terroir goes back to that word I talked about at the beginning. Terroir is soil and climate, and all the elements that go into making each food from each region taste completely singular. So another first course that I particularly love, that I put in Plat du Jour, is from Alsace, and it's called Flamme. And it's, I guess you could sort of simplify it and call it an onion, bacon, and cream pizza. But it's so much more than that. It's really, really thin dough that you have a recipe for. You roll it out as thin as you can. You slather it with onions and and cream, and then you put bacon on the top, and you put it in the hottest oven you can. And it's the Flamme is the Alsatian name for it. It's also called tarte flambée, which basically means burnt tart. So that name comes from the fact that this is a farm dish from the region of Alsace, which of course, you know, has flip-flopped between France and Germany. And so what the baker would do, what the farmer would do, is take some dough, because often the baker and the farmer were the same person, roll it out thin, put it in the fire, put it in the wood burning oven before the coals had burned down to really heat the oven. So there were flames in there, and the flames would lick the edges of this tart, and it would bake for 5-10 minutes. It's very quick. You pull it out, the edges are burnt, everything else is bubbling and crispy and yummy. And he would cut it into pieces and feed it to his staff or his workers. So it's a wonderful first course. And you slice it like a pizza, but it's so thin that you have to kind of roll it up to eat it. So if you go to Alsace, every restaurant offers that as a first course before the Plat du Jour. And the truth is, you could make that a Plat du Jour along with a salad or something like that. So that's one of the dishes here. And it sounds like every dish in this book has bacon in it. That's not true, but it's sort of true, because even a beef stew often will have lardon in it, chunks of bacon. But to go on to the main courses, there's a wonderful recipe in here. Well, there are only wonderful recipes in here. But one of my favorite is called Cowboy, and it's from the north of France. And you could easily find it as a main course Plat du Jour, because it's beef that cooks long and slow in beer. It's braised in beer. And anything braised in beer either comes from the north of France or it comes from Alsace, because those two regions have breweries. So their cuisine is dependent upon what they have in the region. And in the north of France, there are no wineries to speak of. There will be with global warming, but not yet. In Alsace, there are wonderful wineries too. So there's a lot of wine-based cuisine, but lots of beer-based. Anyway, carbonade is beef with onions, braised in beer, with spice bread included in the recipe. And spice bread, pain d'épices, is a huge thing in France. And it's this wonderful bread originally made with rye flour. Now, I'm going to take you back to Charlemagne again. He kind of originated spice bread because he had troops that would go on these long campaigns to do battle. And he was very solicitous of the nutrition of his troops. So he or his cook came up with a recipe for spice bread, which is very nutritious. It's rye flour, honey, and spices, and it keeps forever. And it's translated today, you can buy spice bread everywhere. So in the north of France, they put it in this stew and it cooks long and slow and it gets all yummy with ginger and cinnamon and honey. And it's just an amazing dish. So going back to first courses though, another one might be mussels cooked with curry. So I know some people, when they say, well, curry, that's not French, but it is. Well, it isn't, but it is. Mussels are often cooked with curry, and especially in Brittany, where mussels are cultivated. They're also cultivated in Normandy, but you won't find as much curry there, but you will find it in Brittany because of the spice trade. So a ship docked in Brittany some 600 years ago, and on one of the ships was what were spices. And there was a matelot, which is like a mariner from India on this boat. Well, he got off the boat and somehow met the pharmacist of this village in a place called Lorient. So he and the pharmacist became friends. And, you know, I could make up a huge big story about this. I have no idea how they met, how they became friends, how they ate together. But the result is the Indian matelot gave his recipe for curry powder to the pharmacist. So the pharmacist made the curry powder, and to this day, 2021, in Lorient, there is a pharmacy, the same pharmacy, that sells curry powder that they make. And they are the only ones to make this specific curry powder that's called carigos. And it goes into mussels, among other things. So that's why I have a recipe in this book for mussels with curry. I think that's a very cool story. So I ordered the carigos because I want to try it. It is so spicy that even I could hardly eat it, but it is delicious. And you don't have to use such spicy curry powder to make these mussels. But Plat du Jour, whatever element of a Plat du Jour you're making, it's simple food with incredible flavor. So this mussel dish takes 10 minutes to make. The carbonade that I told you with the spice bread cooks for 2 hours, but the actual putting together of it takes 20 minutes. So you don't really have to do anything for 2 hours. You just have to sort of be there, check on it once in a while. There's not all of the recipes in Plat du Jour are familiar dishes, because a Plat du Jour can be very contemporary. So on the street where I live in Paris, there's a wonderful restaurant that has gotten lots and lots of press. And the chef, you know, now he spends a lot of time standing on the sidewalk. He's there every day. He does click and collect, but I run into him a lot. I love his restaurant. So we were talking one day, and it was the season of fresh shell beans, which starts in the end of July and goes through October. So we were talking, and I don't know, I was asking him something, and he said, well, you know, my Plat du Jour today, I was thinking about doing lamb with fresh shell beans, which is very traditional. And I do have a recipe for that in the book. But he said, I got to thinking, why do I have to do lamb with shell beans? Why couldn't I do monkfish? Well, that's novel. So it sounded delicious. And so I asked him for the recipe. So it's in Plat du Jour also. So what he told me to do was get monkfish and poach it in clarified butter. Only a French chef would think of this. So you poach it in clarified butter. You cook the shell beans, which cook for 12 minutes exactly. You drain the beans. You drizzle some of that clarified butter on the beans, and you serve it with fish and a stick of rosemary. That's it. That's a beautiful plat du jour. And it takes maximum 20 minutes to make. So the book includes all sorts of things, as well as an integral part to any French meal is a green salad. But you can't just make any green salad. And if you're going to make a green salad, you have to have the best vinaigrette on planet Earth. So the French cafe offers the best vinaigrette on planet Earth. For those of you who've been to Paris or to France and sat down and had a salad, I am sure that your heart has caught in your throat as you ask yourself, what is that vinaigrette? Well, the recipe's in Plat du Jour. So you can make it. Because many Plat du Jour come accompanied with a salad. I don't know if any of you know about the cafe called Le Select in Paris. It's very historic. It's in the Montparnasse neighborhood, and it really hasn't changed at all since like 1920. It's just the most wonderful place to go if you want to if you just want to pretend you're somewhere else in a different era when everybody, all the women wear these really flapper outfits, and the waiters have long white aprons that go to the floor, and black vests and white shirts. Guess what? They still dress that way. And the food at the Select is a throwback. But I love to go there. The bar there is this big wooden bar, and you can just go there and live this 1920s, 30s Paris life for the price of an espresso. And I love to go, and sometimes I go for lunch, and they have an amazing mushroom omelet, wild mushroom omelet. That is an iconic plat du jour. So I got to thinking that, an omelet is an omelet, but not really. The omelet at the Select is incredible. So I was able to meet the chef, sit down with him. He gave me his recipe for the omelet, and it has wild porcini mushrooms in it. So he's telling me the ingredients, and I'm looking at it, writing it down. I said, well, when do you put in the garlic? He says, I thought I was gonna have a heart attack. He said, no garlic in this omelet. You would never taste the wild mushrooms. So I recreated his recipe. It's fabulous. It's in this book. And we went back to take a photograph at the restaurant because I wanted the whole feel of this amazing place where, the waiters are dressed just so. So when you get the book, you'll see there's a photograph of the waiter holding the omelet, which I then sat down and ate at the Select. But there's a huge variety of dishes in this book. And my goal for this was many. I always have a lot of goals, but I want all of you, everyone who gets this book in their hands, I want you to make these recipes. So I try to make them clear, more than that, appetizing, the kind of thing that you just can't wait to make. And I want it to be simple, but it's got to speak to you of something else. And especially right now when we're all dying to travel. So each recipe is like a little universe of, sometimes there are historical tidbits. On Dancing Tomatoes, I just did a short video on this potato soup. And it's a potato garlic soup. It's the simplest thing on planet Earth. It's from the Béarn, which is in the Southwest, and it was Henry IV's favorite dish. Henry IV was the guy who said, I want there to be a chicken in every pot in my kingdom. So he had a soup named after him, and it's called Poule au pot. And he made sure that everyone in his kingdom had means to be able to eat chicken once a week. But his true favorite dish was a potato garlic soup. He loved garlic in any form. And his first mistress was recorded as saying, my love, you smell like a dead bird because you eat garlic all the time. Now, it doesn't sound romantic, but she did not have her head cut off. So, it worked. But this soup is fabulous. It's got garlic and potatoes. You cook them gently in either beef broth or water. You crush up the potatoes, then you poach an egg in the soup. So that is a beautiful plat du jour. It's gorgeous potatoes, amazing garlic, a farm fresh egg, and it costs 5 cents. But you serve that to people or to yourself, and you think it's the best thing you ever ate. And because the garlic cooks all the way through in the soup, you will never smell like a dead bird. Promise. So there are so many recipes, and it's so weird to talk to not like, I can see you all, but I don't want to overstay my time. I don't know what the time is, Catherine.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and open it up to audience questions if you're feeling ready for that.
Great.
A nice moment to transition. We did have a couple of questions, just kind of points of clarification I can run through. And then also, yes, I will invite everybody formally to go ahead and submit their questions in the chat feature, and we'll get through as many as time allows. So thank you, Susan, for that wonderful presentation and overview of Plat du Jour. I think those of us who haven't eaten dinner yet are sort of suffering here. So, but in a good way. Very, very inspiring. Thank you. Let's go to, what did I see here? There was a little bit of conversation wondering if you did have vegetarian recipes.
There are vegetarian recipes, definitely, because as a sort of closet vegetarian myself, I'm always looking for recipes where you can either just revolve around vegetables or take away the meat. So there's one particular recipe I'm thinking about. There are many. The omelet, for one, depending on what kind of vegetarian you are. But there's an amazing recipe here from Brittany that revolves around artichokes. And it's artichokes that are cut into slices with carrots and onions and lots of herbs. And there is a little bit of ham in there that you do not have to add. And I say in the introduction to the recipe, for vegetarians, this recipe is going to send you to heaven, because artichokes, the French chef really, the French cook, the French farm cook really knows how to make an artichoke be something extra special. And so I hope the vegetarians among you will make this dish, among others, in the book.
Great, thank you for that. We have somebody wondering, for a point of clarification here, you mentioned a restaurant or cafe. Was it a Le Select, or was, I also missed it. So,
oh, it's Le Select.
Okay.
You know, it's part of the history of Montparnasse, so you can go there today and still see actors and writers, and you know, it's just it captures a moment in time that is still there. Hemingway and all his crowd went to the Select, and the restaurant across the street is La Coupole. So both those restaurants, the Select is the most authentic.
Okay, great. Yeah, and we've had somebody very helpfully add an address in the chat for those of you looking there. So thank you for that. Okay, so Michelle is wondering, is your book available online?
My book is available online. It is also available at any brick and mortar bookstore, but you would have to order it. And I know here where the bookstores do the click and collect also, but it is definitely available online.
Okay, great. And is it available as an ebook as well? I'm not sure if that was.
No, I don't think it's available
as
an ebook.
Okay. Okay.
I don't think so. I should know, but I don't.
All right. So Elizabeth is asking, what is your favorite food region in France, if you had to name just one?
Oh my God. That's a very hard question. You know, my favorite food region is the region I happen to be in. However, I lived for 30 years in Normandy. And so a big part of my heart is there. I spent a lot of time on a foie gras farm in the Dordogne. And the food in Normandy is very, very luxuriously cream, butter, cheese, shellfish, fish, poultry oriented. And then you go to the Dordogne, it's like muscular, you know, it's all goose fat and garlic and foie gras and hearty red wines. So I love that food. But the Pays Basque with the Pays Basque vegetarian recipe, there's a recipe in here where you long slow cook peppers and tomatoes, and then you poach an egg in that. That's from the Pays Basque, the only region in France where they use any spicy pepper at all. It's called piment d'Espelette. So I could go on, but I won't. I mean, it's really hard to choose a favorite region.
Yeah, thank you for your response to that. I've just had someone who's writing that the book is available on Kindle, so
Oh,
just in case anybody
good.
wanted to download it that way, it sounds like you can do so. The
Thank you
next
for
question,
whoever checked that out.
yes, thank you, Faith. Okay, so the next one is from Charlene, who's written, "How difficult is it to convince chefs to give up their recipes?"
Oh, well, it depends what country you're in. The only time I ever had anyone refuse me a recipe, honestly, was when I was in Alaska and I was speaking with an Eskimo cook, and she would not release a recipe. And so, and if somebody doesn't want to give me a recipe, I respect it entirely. In France, nobody owns a recipe. So a chef is always willing to share what they know. And I will say they will share. They will not give you teaspoons. They will not, you just have to, they will tell you what they did. And then you have to go home and puzzle it out. But that's my job. So I would say they're very generous. I really, even in Turkey where I didn't speak the language, I mean, it's a very, very generous, food people are generally quite generous. And I always give credit. So,
Yeah, okay. I see that I missed a question here from Kyle, who's written a very lovely sort of thank you to you. He's longing to be back in Paris cooking with you. He's wondering if you have any ideas about anchovies that he might find in the US to substitute for the French ones. He can't seem to find any
oh,
online.
anchovies are a whole hymn. Um, the best anchovy in the world is from this tiny little port of Collioure in southwest France. Well, it's not really southwest. It's, well, kind of, it's near the Côte d'Azur. So, and they're packed in oil and they're standing up straight and you can see every little filet. So that's what you want to look for, is anchovies that are in a glass jar so you can actually see what they look like. And if they're packed in oil, that's good. You can get wonderful ones also packed in salt, which come from Italy. I can't really give you a brand. I just have to say that you need to look, and in this day and age, your best bet, it'll be your local fancy grocery that will carry probably the best anchovies, even though they are one of the world's most humble ingredients. And they're on the pissaladière in Plat du Jour, which is a pizza, well, tart pizza with tomatoes, onions, olives, and gorgeous anchovy fillets, which you all have to make now.
Great. We wish Kyle good luck with finding his anchovy substitutes. Okay, another comment and question from Anne, which is, everyone who lives in France will have little trouble making plat du jour with whatever we find fresh at the market. What advice would you give to someone who lives in the US without access to regular farmers markets, but who wants to make great plat du jour?
I think about that a lot because I realize that not everybody has what I have. What you have, and the simplistic answer is do the best you can with what you have. A lot more increasingly, supermarkets are really trying to source either local and I realize for some regions, local right now is simply root vegetables. So the best advice is to do the best with what you have at hand. And I preach local and I preach seasonal, which means you're not going to catch me eating a tomato right now. But that's me. And so you just have to do the best you can, which is sort of a non-answer. But I know that not everybody has a farmer's market at their disposal every day of the week.
Great. So this one's from Michelle, who's writing, are the recipes in the book easy to follow here in France, or are they using ingredients you would find in the US? So I think you've hinted at that, but I'll let you develop if you'd like.
I live in France full time. I develop all my recipes here. I use all the ingredients here, but I always have, my books are published in the US, so I'm always thinking about what can people actually get? Well, today people can actually get anything, almost. But yes, and all the ingredients are measured in both ounces and grams. So these recipes can be made anywhere. Absolutely. And really, there's nothing more exotic in this book than a cabbage or an artichoke. I mean, these recipes are intended to be cooked by everyone.
So there's just a comment here from Elizabeth who asked you that tricky question about your favorite region, who's written great answer on your favorite region. It's probably like trying to name your favorite child. And then she's wondering, is the pepper dish piperade? I'm actually not sure how to.
Piperade. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And everybody will love that dish. And by the way, there are some ingredients that are no longer seasonal, such as red bell peppers. A red bell pepper you can get all year round. And you know, would I wish that it were seasonal? If the world were the way I wanted it to be, you know, it would be really different than it is today. So I just accept that a red bell pepper is a year-round ingredient, as is a cherry tomato. So, you know, the whole idea of what's seasonal and local, you have to be a little bit not unrigid, which would be flexible. I guess that's the word for that.
Right. And Crystal is wondering about the portion sizes.
Oh, well, they're not, I don't know what you're wondering, but I do give portion sizes.
What are they? So general, what are the portion sizes? Yeah.
I'd say they're generous without being overwhelming. You know, that's kind of a trick question, because when I go to the US, I think portions are enormous. And in France, portions are satisfying. Sometimes, you know, we're no longer in the day and age of 1 pea and 3 grains of salt as a main course. You know, those days are over. That was the 1970s, where Michel Guérard had, you know, he had us all eating no fat and making these beautiful little things with 4 ingredients. So I'd say portion sizes are satisfying.
Yeah, and she's just added here. Are they easy to make for one person? So
yes,
that makes sense what she meant. Okay.
They're very easy to make for one person. And honestly, not that I would say you bake them to freeze them, but most of these freeze well. And the reason I know that is because when you do a photo shoot, it's not like real life. You're like cooking 10 dishes in one day. And it doesn't matter how many friends you have or how big your family is, you can't eat all that. So what I did is I ended up freezing everything very carefully. And then I was moving, and my move was kind of sudden. I'm like, oh no, I have an enormous freezer full of Plat du Jour. So I had a huge party and I defrosted everything and it got eaten. I recommend that as a way to have a really good time.
Maybe on the other side of the pandemic, we can all open our freezers to our whole neighborhoods.
God bless us all. I tell you, we're all dying for it. Yes.
Yeah. So Jessamy here has a question. She wants to make a poule au pot. If you had any tips for her?
Get a really, really fabulous chicken. That's the main thing, and really good vegetables, and then just put them in there and stand back. You'll love it. You know, a lot of cooking in France, the real true cooking, like the Plat du Jour cooking, you know, the main thing is the ingredient, and the role of the chef or the cook is to stand back and let those ingredients do what they do, which is cook properly and give all of their flavor to a dish, which gives all of its pleasure to you.
Thank you. I think those are lovely words of conclusion, actually. So we don't have any more questions, and we're just running up on time in any case. So thank you so much, Susan. It's been a real pleasure to see you virtually and host you yet again at the American Library in Paris.
Well, thank you all, and I love seeing you all, and Jeff and Leslie, hi.
Great. So I'll go ahead.
Really wonderful. Thank you, Catherine.
Yes, thank you again. I'll go ahead and just say a couple of words by way of conclusion, and then I'm also going to end with a short video on the American Library that you can choose to sort of sit through and watch if you're interested, or you can go ahead and leave the program at any time you would like. But thank you in any case for being here this evening, and also for your wonderful questions tonight. This has been a really lively and fun conversation this evening. Before I let you go, I wanted to remind you that the American Library in Paris is a nonprofit organization. Traditionally in person, when we host events, we welcome donations of about 10 euros per person per event. If that's something that you're interested in doing, if you'd like to support the library this evening, you can still do so by clicking on the link that I sent out with the Zoom link. So it's in that same email that just went out this morning. It's just a little bit above the Zoom link. So we would very much appreciate that. But our events are free, so if you have to run off and start your dinners tonight, that's all right too. We'll be happy to see you next time in any case. So thank you again for being here, and I am going to go ahead and start that video. I won't be able to read your comments once that's active, but you can go ahead and continue chatting, and I hope you enjoy this.
Welcome to the American Library in Paris. Bienvenue à la Bibliothèque américaine à Paris.
Well, the greatest thing about the library for me is the way it brings people together.
The library is not just this quiet place where people sit in a corner and read.
It's an anchor. Libraries are not just places with books, they're places for community, they're places to meet, to study.
It's a cross-cultural touchstone, an anchor for a global community of users from over 60 different countries, and a venue where literature lovers can come together, meet, and exchange meaningfully. The American Library in Paris is really one of the most significant lasting legacies of the Library War Service. During World War I, the American Library Association and the Library of Congress coordinated a nationwide effort to send millions of books to soldiers serving abroad. The library has been tied to literary Paris for as long as we've been in existence. Gertrude Stein and Ernest Hemingway wrote for our newsletter. Henry Miller was a frequent patron. He even wrote us asking us if we had books about Zen Buddhism. It's something that we're incredibly proud of. From our inception, the library has been extremely committed to protecting our patrons' access to information and to books. During World War II, librarians convened a clandestine lending service to our Jewish patrons. During the Red Scare, librarians barred the doors to censors, and we launched a curbside lending service during the pandemic to ensure that our readers had access to books.
From the beginning of our history, the library has been offering story hours for children. And now we have about 250 programs a year for children and teens.
There are so many cultural programs. They're really at the heart of what the library does, and they're just as important as the books on our shelves.
We have community-led book groups. We have author-led writing workshops. We have a visiting fellowship program for rising authors and a writer-in-residence program for more established authors. We also have a series called Evenings with an Author.
Thanks to all of you, American Library of Paris patrons and supporters, for coming out tonight. It's really wonderful to be back here.
My favorite program is Evenings with an Author. I've participated many times. Everyone from Ta-Nehisi Coates to Alice Kaplan has spoken here. There's a real sense of exchange and dialogue and fun and communion at the American Library.
Project 100 is our centennial campaign. Thanks to our community as well as leadership gifts from our Board of Trustees, we've been able to expand the Children's and Teens Library, add an additional group study room, and refresh the collections.
I think the American Library in Paris has an incredibly bright future.
It's really an open place that welcomes dialogue. It's a place where American and French culture mix.
You feel like part of something. From the time I arrived here, I just had a sense of being part of a multicultural community that loves books.
I like this library for the people. The people, to me, are what make the library great.
It honestly makes me feel hopeful about humanity when I meet the children who come here. They're incredibly thoughtful about the world, they're interested, they're exchanging, they're communicating, and I feel like if our future is made of readers, then we have a bright future.
All right, goodbye, everyone. Thank you.